And welcome back to our next edition of the CBB Review Studio podcast. I am Dan Siegel, joined today by my co-host Ariel Puterman. And today we are talking about the NBA draft. Ariel put out a big board on Twitter earlier today, and it consisted of players 1 through 28 who, Ariel, I believe this is not a mock draft, not your projection of who's going to go in what slot, but who is going to be the best NBA player, just to confirm that is correct.
Yep. Yeah, obviously, a lot of these players on the big board, the fits wouldn't make sense based on where those teams are picking. But I think big board's a better way of evaluating talent. And obviously, there's going to be a couple opinions that you don't agree on, but we can run through it and talk about it in a little bit.
Yeah, so I'll put it, here we go, scrolling along the bottom of the screen. I have it from 28 down to 1. That's the order I'm going to go in, so I'll just kind of go from the bottom to the top and give you my main takeaways and let you discuss. So I'm going to start at number 24. You got Zach Edey from Purdue. I think the general trend that everybody has pretty much noticed from the college to the NBA jump is that there's not much of a place in the pros for traditional bigs. But in my opinion, Zach Edey is just so talented, so skilled at his size that there's got to be a way to make use of just the production that he had in college. And he is not just any traditional post big. Like, this man was National Player of the Year back-to-back time for the first time since Ralph Sampson. Do you see Edey as an exception or a rule to that trend of the post bigs, the traditional bigs, just not having much of a role in the National Basketball Association?
Yeah, I think it comes down to this. At Purdue, he was the number one option. He was touching the ball every possession. In the NBA, that's not going to be the case. They're not going to build, whoever drafts him, they're not going to build their offense around Zach Edey. So my big question is, when he's not touching the ball every possession, what is he doing? Is he setting screens? Can he space the floor at all? He was actually pretty impressive during the combine when it came to shooting drills, which was a pleasant surprise for some teams. On the defensive end, is he going to be able to match up with these versatile big men, things we don't really see as much in college. College is a lot more traditional big men who kind of camp in the paint. Also, the defensive 3-second rule, not a thing in the NBA, thing in college basketball, which is going to be huge. You can't just camp in the paint anymore. So that's my biggest question. Like you mentioned, really great player, and he can be great. He's going to be the tallest player in the NBA next year. He's got the size. He's got the physicality that matches up in the NBA. My biggest question is, when the offense isn't revolving around him, how impactful can he be? I think his floor is pretty solid. I'm just worried about his ceiling in that standard. And that's why he goes 24 for me.
That's fair, because I think, honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if he was actually a decent, like, I don't know, a true low 30s, 30%, even 3-point shooter, because they just didn't even, if he was a below average 3-point shooter, they wouldn't need to bother with him at Purdue, given how good he was at the paint. But that doesn't mean he's like, he was fine as a foul shooter. So I wouldn't be surprised if he was at least competent from beyond the arc, and that'll be showcased a little more in the NBA. I'm going to move on to the teens of your list. Let's talk about number 18, Deron Holmes, because Deron Holmes from Dayton, another big, somebody who was, again, kind of like Edey in that he was just a dominant post big, but then he went to the NBA draft process last year, got the feedback that he needed a little more shooting touch, and improved mightily throughout the year at Dayton last year. And I know he faded off a little bit down the stretch, but do you think him going back to school for another year has been a good investment, having him at 18 on your list?
Absolutely. I think for two reasons. One, the difference in the draft classes. We talk all the time about how good that draft class was last year was. So coming into this draft class where it's a little bit weaker, he can be a little bit better and obviously go a little bit higher. I think that helps. He was also able to fix some of those problems, like you mentioned. I think he became more of a focal point. He became more of a big guard, which is really important in the NBA, being able to ball handle. I am a little worried about his rebounding. He wasn't a great rebounder for his height. Defensively, he was good, not great. And for his size and wingspan, I think he should be great. Things that he can definitely get better in the NBA. So that's why I think he's about a mid-round talent. I think his floor is pretty solid. I think his ceiling is good. I just think he still has a lot to work on, and at his age, I just don't know how much patience these teams will have. So I hope he finds the right spot.
And then speaking of someone who's not great with his wingspan, well, this is the complete opposite. Ryan Dunn, number 16 on your list from Virginia. I wrote an article for SB Nation Streaking the Lawn about Ryan Dunn today, actually. And basically, people think he is the best defensive player in this draft class, perhaps the most versatile wing in multiple of the past draft classes. The problem is, especially down the stretch at Virginia, his offensive production was just not there besides a little bit of cutting to the rim. He was especially struggling from beyond the arc. Do you think this was more of a system problem or a Ryan Dunn problem when you evaluate Ryan Dunn from Virginia?
Yeah, I think you nail it. Absolutely amazing defender. He's been climbing up my big board, just watching more and more defensive tape. But like you mentioned, that offense is a problem. And I think it's a little bit of both. Obviously, Virginia isn't known for its spectacular offense, and I don't think he'll ever be a top 3 scoring option on his team. I'm just worried about what he's going to do on that end. He's not a Derek Lively kind of player where he can rim run, he can run pick and rolls, things like that. He's not a shooter, obviously. So what is he going to do? You can't in the NBA. You can't run 4-on-5 on offense. I know there is a lot of isolation. So I'm just curious how they're going to use him. Obviously, his defense makes up for it. That offense is just a huge problem that I'm a little bit worried about.
And then we continue to move up. I want to talk about number 12, Dalton Connect from Tennessee. I've seen him a lot higher on a lot of big boards. I was looking at Matt Norlander's big board actually earlier today. He has him number 1, I believe, on his NBA draft list in terms of just best players from a 8 to 10 year outlook in the future. Why are you low on Connect in specific?
Yeah, it's kind of tough. I feel like honestly in this draft, any of these players can go between 1 and 20. That just there's no clear option at the top, and there's no big drop off. There's no tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. I think my biggest thing is his age, and I know that's kind of an old take, but I wonder how much of his success last year was him just being older and more experienced than everyone else compared to his actual talent. I'm not denying he has a lot of talent. I think he'll be a great piece in the NBA. I just wonder if he's going to be a top 5 good piece in the NBA, especially since he's already well into his 20s. I think his shooting is great. I think he has good explosiveness. I think he'll help a team right away. I'm just worried about his ceiling. Can he reach that next level? Can he be an all-star one day? And I'm kind of worried that he's not going to ever reach that level.
But to be fair, you noted that this draft class does not have the same kind of top-level talent as previous years. I think that's a pretty big consensus take. If you are surely going to get an above average to good NBA player, I'm sure you're going to take it. So that's the counter argument on your point right there. But I understand what you are saying. Moving into the top 10, let's talk about the 2 UConn guys, actually. So you had Stephon Castle, number 7, above the other UConn guy that I've seen maybe previously over the past couple weeks as high as number 1 on mock drafts. He's kind of fallen off a little bit, and that is Donovan Clingan. So you have Castle at 7 and you have Clingan at 12. In my opinion, Castle should be higher than Clingan. I think Clingan's upside is a little bit limited as somebody who's not a very good shooter. And yes, it's not really a valid comparison comparing him to Edey because they're different kinds of players. Clingan has a little bit more length, I believe. If anything, he's more athletic. So they're not the same thing, but to have Clingan considered one of the best prospects in this draft and to have Edey considered just a late first-round pick, in my opinion, is not fair. On the other hand, I think Stephon Castle is a guy that basically has everything that you would want out of a guard in an NBA offense. Maybe his shooting has room for improvement, but I don't think it's as bad as people say it is. Where are you kind of on these 2 UConn guys?
Yeah, so I have Clingan at 11. Clingan's obviously an incredible player. His defense is arguably one of the best in all of the draft. Him and Dunn are probably 1 and 2 for me. You can throw Sar in there as well, who I'm sure we'll get to in a minute. The offense was good. He tried to space the floor a little bit at the end of the season, kind of showed that he has a 3-point shot, but he hasn't really asserted that he can really stretched the floor yet. I'm just curious what his NBA comp would be. Is it Walker Kessler? Is his floor, and Rudy is his ceiling? I mean, that's a high ceiling, one of the best defensive players in modern history. But he's probably going to fall somewhere in that. And in today's NBA, I just don't know how useful that will be. And I hope that he gets better because I think he will. And I think he can develop that outside shot. And some of his game will translate really well. But my biggest question is, what's that ceiling? And when these teams, they're in the top 5, top 10, they're there for a reason. They're not one piece away. They don't need a guy who will win now. They need a guy who they can take a shot in the dark. And if they turn out to be an all-star, then that accelerates them more. If they bust, then they'll just wait for the next draft. And I don't think Clingan is that guy. That's why I'm happy with him going somewhere at 11 for a team who maybe is a piece away or a piece or two away. And then Castle, like you mentioned, I have him number 7. Great player. He really showed a lot last year. I think he could have shown even more, but obviously his situation was perfect and he didn't have to. And he's a champion, so I'm sure he's not complaining. But in terms of guards, I think you can make a serious case that he's a top 2 guard in this draft. The shooting could be a little bit better, but everything else is great. So I'm excited to see where Castle goes, and I think he could be really good.
Yeah, I think you have Castle 7. You have Devin Carter 8. Devin Carter, I believe, that would be your highest ranked upperclassman in this draft. So you have him higher than Connect, which I honestly agree with him. I agree with you. Like, Carter was just an absolute bucket last year, and both of them were probably equally just huge critical centerpieces in their offense, but I think that's fair. I want to talk about your top 5, though, specifically the 2 Kentucky guys. You're high on both of them. You have Dillingham and Shepherd both in your top 5, and Dillingham is, I think, a little bit higher on your big board than the average big board. So specifically talk to me about Dillingham and why you like Dilly so much.
Yeah, it honestly shocks me how people don't see him as a top 10 prospect. He was terrific in high school, came into college, shot 44% from 3, which is unbelievable. If you can get a guy to shoot 37% from 3, that's a good prospect. He shot 44%. He has great ball handling skills. He's a great shooter. He's great at getting to the rim. I think he averaged 15 points a game in 22 minutes last year, which is insane. So imagine that in a per 36 situation. You've got one of the best scorers in the league. Also, Kentucky guards just always seem to work out in the NBA. Every year we let them kind of slide or we don't trust them as much, and every year they over-deliver. Tyrese Maxey is the best example, and I think that's his closest thing to a player comp. A guy who can really shoot it, a guy who isn't that tall, maybe not the best defender in the world, but man, he can really score and he can really lead a team, and I think Dillingham is that. And then Reed Shepherd, like you mentioned, I have him at number 5. Shot 52% from 3 last year, which is insane. I don't think he'll really hit that level. If he does, then he'll be the best shooter of all time. I think I would be more around that 38%, but he's got a great vertical. I think he had the best vertical or one of the best verticals at the combine. He's a leader. He's a winner. He's only a freshman. He's young. So I think he would be a great piece for any team, and he's definitely a top 5 pick in this draft.
All right, and then I have to ask you about your number 1 guy, Alex Sarr. I've talked all about college guys in the first 13, 14 minutes of this episode. That's my area of expertise. That's your area of expertise. But you have Sarr number 1. I don't think that's a hot take at all, but just briefly tell me what you love out of the big man from France.
Yeah, I think he's the clear number 1 pick. 7-footer, can move really well. I think he could be one of the best defenders in the league. Incredible wingspan as well. Offense still needs a lot of work, but there are signs and there are things that he can grow. And with the right training staff, I think he can get there really quickly. I think, like I mentioned this draft, you can move around a lot of pieces, but I think Sarr is the best player right now. And I wouldn't be surprised. It looks like he's going to go to the Wizards, who haven't been the best developing players, but I think this will be a good situation where they kind of hand him the keys and kind of let him do his thing, let him grow, get him those minutes. So I think at the end of the day, when you have that first pick or second pick or third pick, you look at who is the most ceiling, who can fit the best on this team. And I think Sarr is that guy.
All right, so it's agreed. It is not the greatest NBA draft class, but there will be obviously some surprises, some players that do pan out. And that is just Ariel's opinion. So be sure to leave in the comments what you think are your hot takes for this NBA draft, what you thought of his list. Thanks for watching and listening, and take care.